Hey everybody, it is Wintermute coming to you from the think tank, and we're going to look at China at War as an expansion. Now, I want to do a whole series of kind of talking about the expansions and what they bring to the game and their specific rules, kind of how I look at some of them. But I'm not going to do all the expansions. Quite frankly, some of the expansions I just don't particularly have a big interest in, like the Atlantis one. I just don't have a big interest in that one personally. I prefer a little more historical accuracy. Same thing with the zombies one. I mean, it's perfectly reasonable. I know, it's, they're not terrible expansions by any means. They just don't interest me as much. So, and I'm not going to go back and do a lot of the older expansions either, even though most of them have been updated for 3rd edition, or at least the rules have been updated so they work with 3rd edition a little bit better. Even if because some of those older ones I think need an overhaul from start to finish. And kind of, rework and rethink about how they work. I know Jinx did that with Canada at War, and I had a little bit of input with that. He bounced some ideas off me and asked for some feedback. So, I will do some of the ones that have been revised, some of the ones I'm interested in, but I'm not going to, break my back trying to get them all done, or ones that just don't interest me. So, but in this instance, I've just kind of wrapped up doing kind of like an overview of China, CCP, and the Kmt. So I figured, well, okay, let's go ahead and take a look at this expansion and see what it brings to the game. Excuse me. So, obviously, we don't need that. So, right off the bat, it starts with Kmt, and it talks about Kmt Elite Units. So every time KMT conquers a land zone, KMT can upgrade one participating regular infantry unit to elite at no cost. Upgrade the selected infantry by placing one of the elite unit markers below that unit immediately after the battle. And basically when it becomes elite, it gains +1 attack and +1 defense. A maximum of 5 units can be upgraded per game. If an elite unit is destroyed, the marker is permanently removed from the game. So you win a battle, put the marker down, but after that, if that unit dies for whatever reason, he doesn't come back. He doesn't get rebuilt. That marker is just gone from the game. Now, I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead right into the CCP Elite Units, because they basically work exactly the same way with one difference. Well, 2 differences. First, they only have a maximum of 2 units that can be upgraded throughout the game. And so long as one of them is on the board, you get a +1 to all your recruitment rolls. So, yeah, that's pretty good. And it gives the CCP a reason to maybe get a little more aggressive earlier. Get out there, get that elite guy. Hopefully he survives. Bring him back, protect him, and then start, getting more likely to get those recruitment rolls and start to hopefully steamroll. And same thing with KMT. I talk in my video about how generally they're going to both be pretty defensive to begin with, but at the same time, maybe they kind of reevaluate what's going on and go, well, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and pick the low-hanging fruit for that particular territory. I'm going to go grab it, get an elite unit out of it, for later use, and things like that. Now, I will add, the elite KMT units do not suffer from attack weakness. And I did get that clarified with the person who wrote these rules, because they're not considered regular infantry, they're considered elite infantry, so they're classified differently. And then another thing the KMT can do is the Chinese Expeditionary Force. Okay, this one's a little wordy. On July 1941 turn or later, the KMT player may spend 2 IPP during the production phase to create the Chinese Expeditionary Force. Immediately place a CEF marker underneath up to 3 regular infantry in Yunnan. These units may move and attack outside of China even prior to the end of the Chinese Civil War. CEF units must move into Burma on their first movement. They then come under British command and may move and attack on the British turn and attack and defend together with other Commonwealth units. The units may only move within starting FEC land zones, Siam or French Indochina. Excuse me. During the FEC turn, in the production phase, the KMT player may return the CEF back to Yunnan, announcing their withdrawal, removing the markers and placing them immediately in Yunnan, so long as Yunnan is in a supply path to their location. The CEF can only be created once per game. Okay, so one thing about this is, so basically it gives China the ability or KMT the ability to pay $2 and basically give FEC permission to use 3 of its infantry, in their home territory, down this way, and then Siam and French Indochina down here. So obviously, I talk about how sometimes KMT just gets really defensive and they can't quite break out. Well, if you're really defensive and Japan isn't coming after you and you're at a point in the game where, you know what, I've got so many infantry in Yunnan, I can go ahead and spend 2 IPP and loan 3 to the FEC to hopefully stymie the Japanese advance down here, well, that kind of makes sense. Or maybe the KMT have a runaway game and they become a major power, but like I said before, when the CCP became a runaway power, I couldn't do much. I mean, I could threaten some of this stuff, but I really couldn't project my threat off the continent very well. Well, this gives you a chance to go ahead, okay, well, I have control of everything. I'm a major power. Basically, Japan's not coming at me anytime soon again. So I'll pay $2 and loan out 3 infantry to FEC and stymie their efforts down in Southeast Asia and into India. So yeah, I mean, I like that. I think that's cool. It's neat. It doesn't cost a whole lot. It's and it's certainly not going to be anything. I don't think it's going to be anything game breaking if you do it. It's just a nice, neat option to give the KMT for use at some point in the game if they think it's worth it. And of course, I'm sure there are games where you'll have that option, but you'll never take it because the game is just playing out in a way that it's really not going to work all that well. So CCP, now we've talked about the elite units, and then we're going to do the long march. When the KMT is attacking CCP units, defending CCP land units are able to retreat in the first round of combat in lieu of rolling for defense. Note, this requires an adjacent CCP-possessed land zone where they can retreat to. It is not possible for CCP units to retreat in defense when fighting nations other than the KMT. So, no, you can't retreat from Japan. It's only when they're trying to get away from the KMT. Now, of course, you need a land zone to go to. And if you don't have that, then they've got you cornered, and that's that. That's all there is to it. Now, of course, anytime that you have a retreat option like that, there's a chance they could come in, score a couple hits, and you're like, well, I've just got to say, I mean, it'd be nice to kind of roll and hopefully score some hits on them, but on the other hand, you know what, I need to live to fight another day. And that's absolutely true, I think, more often with the CCP than it is with the KMT, just because of their starting positions. So yeah, it's if the Civil War is still going on, I think it makes perfect sense to go ahead and conserve your forces for a later fight. So foreign support and intervention. Okay, supply marker. A supply marker represents military supplies such as small arms, heavy weapons, ammunition, food, medicine, and other items necessary for warfare. A supply marker costs 1 IPP. The recipient of the supply marker may expend it during the place units and collect income phase in order to upgrade a militia to a regular infantry in the land zone containing the supply marker. A supply marker may be moved by strategic rail or rail movement or by lend-lease. So, here's the neat thing about supply markers. If they're an inexpensive way for a foreign major power to give aid to whatever faction they're supporting. So if I was playing KMT and I have a bunch of militia sitting around, well, I can start paying 2 IPP a turn to upgrade one of them to an infantry so I can use them offensively or move them around. So that's 2 IPP for them to do it. Or I can let an ally lend-lease me supply markers for 1 IPP for them and then get the same effect and then save that $2 for me for later turns, or save, however much it ends up being. So in that sense, it makes economic sense to for your allies to supply you with supply markers when they can get away with it. Now, there's a little bit of a problem with that, because if, let's say, and I did clarify that there is no limit to the number of supply markers that can be supplied via lend-lease. So let's say you have a bunch of infantry or militia in Nanking. An allied nation loans you, let's say there's just three. There's three there. An allied nation loans you 3 supply markers and puts them straight into Nanking. And then Japan, much like when Japan sees the CCP get that first roll and grab that northern warlord, and they go, nope, that ain't going to happen. Well, depending on how the turn order works out, they may get those supply markers, and then Japan may go, nope, we're not going to let you get away with that. And Japan comes in and stomps Nanking before they turn those 3 militia into 3 infantry. So, there's a little bit of a lag there in how you can use them. But again, sometimes the way the turn order works out, it may not be a big deal. If America's supplying it, then Japan will get to act before the KMT can use it. If the Commonwealth are the ones supplying it, then Japan will not get a chance to act and maybe destroy those supply markers before they get used. So if you think about it like that, it's an efficient exchange of resources. Now, that said, you might be better off kind of saying, okay, well, let's go ahead and let's just lend-lease them a fighter, or let's just lend-lease them an artillery. That may be better in the long run. And it really didn't specify whether or not you can give money and supply markers, or a unit and supply markers, or whether you could just give supply markers and then that's all you're giving that turn. And me and my group will kind of talk about how we want to do that. But, it didn't specify, and I'm not going to assume I know how that works. Maybe somebody else has kind of ran into it and sorted out how that's supposed to work. But irregardless, even if it's limited to, okay, well, you give a supply marker, that's all you're giving, that's your unit, 1 unit for the turn, but there's no limit to the number of supply markers you can do in a single turn. So yeah, you may have a bunch of, KMT may have a bunch of militia that they're going to go, okay, well, sure, we'll take $3 and then, flip 3 militia into infantry, and that's a for $1 each, that's a pretty good investment. So supply markers give a very cost-effective way of getting resources to China. Now this one's really interesting, and this one has a lot of kind of interesting aspects to it, and this is German support. Each turn KMT is not at war with Japan. The German and KMT players may agree to enter into an arms for raw materials trade agreement. This enables KMT to buy 1 artillery class or vehicle class unit per turn from the German build chart at the unit cost plus 1 extra IPP. This extra IPP goes to the becomes German cash in return. So if the KMT were to buy 1 light armor at 5 IPP, 4 would go to the bank and 1 would go to the German player. And I was actually interested by this. I actually looked up the history behind this and where this is coming from, and sometimes these expansions will kind of, they're neat to read and explore, because I didn't really understand what Germany's relationship was to China in general. And in looking this up, it kind of explained it. So this actually made sense. I'm not going to go into that here, but it's something that's neat to look up. So this one has a lot of kind of factors to take into account. First and foremost, if Germany is going to sell arms to the KMT, those are arms that will probably be used against Japan at some point, and that may irk the Japanese player. On the other side, so there's that. But Germany starts getting money out of it. Now, not a lot of money, but $1 a turn. So even if they do that 3 turns in a row, that's 3 more bucks for Germany. That's another infantry division or infantry unit out there on the board. But then what is Japan going to have to deal with right now, or when it comes time to invade? Now, the other thing is KMT doesn't have a whole lot of money to play with. So if you're going to pay $1 extra to get something you couldn't normally get, is that worth it? On the other hand, you're paying $1 extra to get something you couldn't normally get. So I think the most obvious thing right off the bat so if you look at what their options are, what they can buy, especially like right off the bat, I think the most obvious two choices that they want to look at and consider are AAA artillery or just regular artillery. Each one is worth $4, would become $5 if they were to buy it. So right off the bat, first turn, if the Germans agree to this, the KMT player can start buying one artillery a turn. Now, if they do that over 3 turns, and assuming that the KMT is getting $6 and that hasn't really changed, that's going to be, let's say they do that for 3 turns in a row, turn 1, turn 2, turn 3. The KMT player will have 3 artillery, and the German player will have 3 extra bucks. So 3 extra artillery sitting in Nanking is not insubstantial in terms of defensive and offensive capabilities for the Chinese player, for the KMT player. Because even if Japan comes in and surrounds Nanking and blockades it, and the artillery is still defending on 2s, and they still have first strike. So, maybe he gets lucky and gets a couple first strikes in there, and really whittles away at the Japanese. Now, the flip side of that, that's a total of $15 over 3 turns. Would the KMT player rather just have 5 more infantry? Because that's what $15 is going to buy you if you don't buy arms from Germany. And then you're not giving money to the German player. So it's really an interesting kind of dilemma for all parties involved, for the KMT, for Japan, and for the Axis player. The German player, because it wouldn't be bad to get money, a couple extra bucks at the beginning of the game. Now I'm assuming that they're not going to do this every turn, or maybe they will, or that they're going to do it, or they won't. Sometimes the German players just say, "Nah, I don't want to do this." Sometimes the KMT player is just going to go, "Nah, I don't think that's worth it." So I'm kind of just averaging it out. That okay, if they do it for 3 turns in a row, here's where you kind of end. Anything beyond that, I think would be, I don't know, kind of just a little different. In terms of, it'd be hard to kind of predict. Because by that point, Japan's probably looking at coming in, and China probably doesn't want to spend all their money on all that stuff every turn. Now, of course, you could do 1 flak gun right off the bat, because there's a good chance Nanking's going to be attacked by air units. So that you could do that for $5, and then you could maybe do artillery or you could just do 3 flak in a row or 2 flak. Just depends on what you're looking at. Now, what other options are there that I think are worth it? I don't really know whether much else on the build chart is going to be worth it. If you think the Japanese player is going to come in with a lot of tanks or mechanized or motorized and mechanized infantry, then I guess in theory you could buy a tank destroyer for 6. But I don't know, that seems unlikely. I think you're way better off with the flak at that point, the flak gun. What else could you... Light armor I don't think is worth it, because it's not terrible, but now you're paying a premium. You're paying $5 for it. So, if you wanted to land in Nanking and then you'll be ready to kind of go at one of the warlords pretty quickly, well then okay, I guess that kind of makes sense, but I don't think that's worth $5, and it's not going to help you defend against the Japanese. So, there may be an argument for that. And I haven't actually played this expansion, so I'm kind of theorizing what seems like a reasonable thing to try and do right off the bat. But maybe once it gets a couple iterations where it's been played through a couple times, I may feel very different and go, oh yeah, absolutely, we're going to buy an artillery return, we're going to buy that tank destroyer, we're going to buy that light armor, whatever the case is. And anything besides those units that I mentioned, I really don't know whether they're worth it, because then you're starting to look at the KMT having to save up multiple turns to get it. I mean, in theory, they could save up for, they can't buy air units, so that's not even an option. They can't buy mechanized and medium armor till several, later in the game. And by the point that becomes available to the German player, odds are the Japanese are already going to be knee deep in the quagmire that is China, so it's really not going to be it's going to be kind of a moot point. There could be, in theory, self-propelled artillery for 6? Yeah, I don't think that's worth it. Because the KMT is just not a very mobile army to begin with. Now I have talked about cavalry being a good choice if you can pull it off for counterattacks. but the self-propelled artillery and regular artillery in general doesn't support cavalry. So it really, I don't see that being a very viable, very good option personally. But yeah, this is a very interesting aspect to this expansion, and I like that because it gives it makes 3 different players have to kind of come together and go, all right, how do I feel about this, and kind of maybe work things out amongst themselves. So then we're going to go look at Soviet support. Once the KMT is at war with Japan and has a truce with the CCP, so you need to have the war with Japan and the truce with the CCP and the KMT, and if the Japanese-Soviet non-aggression pact has not been signed, the USSR may send one of its existing aircraft to KMT, creating a Soviet volunteer group, using the Lend-Lease rules for delivery, even though it doesn't count as Lend-Lease. Once the SVG reaches China, it comes under KMT command. This means the SVG will move on the KMT turn and jointly attack defend together with the KMT units. Only one SVG unit may be active in China at any time. If destroyed, a new unit may be sent. During the KMT turn, in the production phase, the Soviet player may return the SVG by moving the units back to the Soviet home country on its turn. If Japan and the USSR sign the Japanese-Soviet non-aggression pact, the SVG is immediately returned back to the nearest land zone in USSR home country. Okay, I do have one point that I want to make about this one. It says that it goes via Lend-Lease. It says use the Lend-Lease rules for delivery, even though it is not Lend-Lease. But if it retreats, it simply goes right back to the Russian home country. Like it just flies there directly. And I'm going to read in the next section how it can create an air bridge, and how the air bridge transport unit can fly over warlords and Mongolia and so on and so forth. So I really kind of feel like I would propose that this air unit can just fly straight into KMT territory like the land bridge could. That's just a point I wanted to bring up because, just as an option, because I don't know, it just like why would you send them on boats, but yet you can still send up an air bridge, no problem. So maybe there's a historical reason for that. I just don't know, but unless that comes up, I'm probably going to just say it can just fly right into KMT territory. So the air bridge. In addition to sending Lend-Lease, the USSR may support CCP with an air bridge. The USSR may fly an air transport from any Soviet home country land zone to a CCP-possessed land zone. This does not count towards Lend-Lease limits. It can deliver either 2 IPP or 1 supply marker. Such a flight may fly over semi-autonomous warlords, Mongolia, KMT, or Axis-held land zones. The air transport must return to a Soviet-possessed land zone after having delivered the IPP/supplies. So, let's take a quick look here. So right off the bat, if you have an air transport here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So right there, you've got that right off the bat. If Senshi is available, anything else sort of just becomes, depending on whether they control their territory down here, and that's where you'd rather deliver the resources or whatever the case is. Now it's either or. It's 2 IPP, which gets dropped off, and then the CCP can use it however they want, or it's 1 supply marker. Now, if it's coming from Russia, the Russians and the CCP take their turn effectively simultaneously. So they can drop off that money and drop off the supply marker and then the CCP can basically use it they can't use the money because the production phase would have already been there. But they can, the production phase already would have come and gone. However, that's obviously $2 may be more valuable to the CCP than a single supply marker. So you'll just have to make that choice as the Russian player. But the supply marker can be used that turn because that gets used during the place units and collect income phase. So if they've got a couple militia there, that you can drop off the supply marker one every turn, and they can just go ahead and, okay, infantry, 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 whatever the case is. So yeah, that's, but again, it also kind of boils down to, early on in the game, Russia does not have a whole lot of money to play with. They just don't. So that's one of the big things they need to ask themselves is how much money am I going to put out to my allies in China or Republic in Spain? Because I don't have a whole lot to invest for myself. So now allied support. Once KMT is at war with Japan, USA may, irrespective of income level, send one of its existing fighters to KMT, creating the American Volunteer Group, which we know are known as the Flying Tigers. Use the Lend-Lease rules for delivery, even though it is not technically Lend-Lease. Now, obviously, in this case, that fighter is not going to be anywhere near KMT territory, realistically. Unless this happens really late in the game. Once the AVG reaches China, it comes under KMT command. This means AVG move on the KMT turn and jointly attack defend together with KMT units. So, in theory, you can have both a Russian and an allied fighter fighting there with the KMT against the Japanese. Interesting thing. Now, of course, back to Russia, kind of like with the German support for the KMT, the Russian support for the KMT can be problematic if they're trying to make sure that, if they're trying to set up the CCP for a win and to get their victory points. Because if the KMT do well, then that's going to make it harder for the CCP to swoop in and do what they need to do. On the other hand, the Russian player may go, well, you know what, I'm okay just fighting the Japanese. I just want to fight the Japanese. I'm okay with that. Let's see. During the KMT turn, in the place units and collect income phase, the U.S. player may return the AVG back to the U.S. using the Lend-Lease supply path. In addition to sending Lend-Lease, the Allies may also support KMT with an air bridge. The Allies may fly an air transport from any zone to a KMT land zone. This does not count towards Lend-Lease limits. It can deliver either 2 IPP or 1 supply marker. The air transport must return to an Allied possessed land zone after having delivered the IPP/supplies. So, now, the interesting thing with this one is, let's look at Philippines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, obviously, the U.S. is severely limited in what it can do out in this ocean based on its IPP level and what's going on with Japan. By the time America could get to a point where they could have a transport there, may fly an air transport from any zone to a KMT land zone. Now, the difference is the Soviet support has to come from their land zone. The Allied support can come from any zone, presumably the Allies control. Although it doesn't specifically say that. I mean, obviously that's going to be the case. You can't put transports on carriers, so that's not really a thing. So America being the one to do that is probably less likely to happen unless they can get a transport out here somewhere. On the other hand, you do have the option of the FEC and or the ANZAC possibly building a transport to do this and start doing a supply token or $2 every turn. In addition to Lend-Lease. I mean, when you think about it now, if you're at a point where Japan really is going after China and FEC is in a position where they really need to really make sure Yunnan does not fall, they could Lend-Lease an infantry into Yunnan. Then they could fly a transport into Yunnan and drop off 2 more bucks. And then you could have the ANZAC basically Lend-Lease right into Yunnan as well, depending. And then America as well, if you really need to do that. And KMT goes after the FEC. So if the FEC drops off $2, then they can go ahead, as soon as it becomes the KMT turn, they will have those $2 to spend. Whereas if Russia drops off $2 to the CCP, The CCP will not be able to spend that because their turns take, that chance for them to do that has already passed. And that's just one of those oddities of how turn order works out. So now whether that's actually worth it for the FEC to do, it just depends. Now remember, the FEC player may go to the KMT player and say, all right, I'm going to build an air transport, and I'm going to start giving you money, but in exchange, later on in the game, I expect you to give me the Expeditionary Force, those 3 infantry from earlier. And I cannot for the life of me remember what the heck they were actually, what their proper name was. Chinese Expeditionary Force, yeah. So you can kind of cut a deal with the Chinese player, and the Chinese player can go, oh yeah, help me stand up to Japan, keep me in the game at this very important point, and I guarantee later on in the game you'll get your 3 infantry from me to help protect Southeast Asia. So again, there's some interesting play there between the different players and what their motives are and what their goals are. And how they can kind of interact with each other. So again, I really like that aspect of this expansion. And then the last kind of big thing is Soviet intervention in Sinkhang. This one's kind of an odd one. USSR may invade Sinkhang on the July 1937 turn or later in order to protect Chiang Shikai, the local warlord. Soviet victory. If the USSR wins, Sinkhang becomes a Soviet-controlled minor power. Sinkhang victory. If the USSR loses or retreats, Sinkhang and Singhai. Okay, so Sinkhang and Singhai align with the KMT. So, why would Russia want to go into Sinkhang? I'm not actually sure. I don't have a good answer. I really don't see that being a good idea. Now, if they think that Japan is going to basically steamroll China, and they're worried about Japan threatening that part of Russia and coming in that way, then I could see them going, okay, we're going to go in and take Sinkhang, and we're going to turn it into a minor power. So that's, so Japan cannot sit there in Sinkhang and build up. They have to build up in Singhai, and then come into Sinkhang, and then go into Russia. So it buys Russia a turn. So I could see that. One thing, though, with this is, when I first read this, I thought Russia basically just took it over. But then I reread it a little later and went, oh, wait, no, it becomes a minor power. That means that the CCP, even if they get Singhai, they recruit Singhai. This is a minor power at this point that's controlled by Russia. This doesn't put them adjacent to Russian-possessed territory. So my understanding is they would not get their +2 bonus for that. Now, on the flip side, Russia would roll 1 die a turn to recruit for that. Well, yeah, but no, they wouldn't be at war, so no, they wouldn't even do that. I'm wrong about that. So, yeah, the only reason I see them doing that, practically, unless there's something I'm missing, and that's very possible, is to create kind of a buffer for Japan, to keep Japan back a little bit.